Where is your Oscar? Is it in the room there?
Would you like to see it?
Yes. I should have
Okay,
asked that.
hold on. It's it's an amazing thing actually to sort of have this, having watched that show since we were children. Uh, so it comes with all kinds of memories and all kinds of stuff with it.
What you actually just saw was the tag end of quite an interesting interview with Oscar winning director, producer, cameraman Frank Stiefel. This is bonus episode number 8 of Westdoc Online, sponsored by Pond 5 and LumaForge. Hope you enjoy. Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. This is Chuck Braverman, your host and moderator for this special edition of Westdoc Online. Today we have a very special guest. He is a brand new Oscar winner, and his name is Frank Stiefel, and he is the producer and the director and the cameraman on a documentary film called Heaven is a Traffic Jam on the 405. And let's go right now to Frank, who is speaking from his home office. How are you doing, Frank?
I'm good. How are you, Chuck?
I'm good, thank you.
Good.
Just as a note right off the bat, I will let you all know that Frank and I actually are very good friends for some time. We met biking together around Santa Monica, and although we haven't been biking in a while, we're still friends. And I'm quite happy and quite proud of my friend, and I think he's well deserving of this honor. And I think beside the fact that Frank and I are friends, I wanted to feature this film and Frank because after he won, I really sat down and thought about what you have accomplished, Frank, and I thought it was pretty extraordinary because not only were the other 100 films that were submitted and the 4 Oscar nominees, quite good films, especially the other nominees, but you were up against some rather big-time competition in terms of promotion and newspaper ads and screenings and handouts and everything else. And you want to just enlighten us a little bit on what your feelings were after the nomination and going forward, and especially as it involves a promotion of your film and how it got made.
Okay. Well, there are so many tracks to be able to speak about this. So one of them has to do with the fact that in the shorts category, it's a category that for the most part, and up until recently, probably an awful lot of people like me entered, which is to say, people who had a great deal of passion for a subject and had no support while making the film. What's happened over the last few years has been that some very big players are into the doc short category, beginning with the New York Times and their op docs, going to Netflix, HBO, and a series of other smaller but still formidable entities. And so if you're not part of that game, if your film hasn't been picked up by Netflix, you now find yourself coming up against opening up your New York Times in the morning or your LA Times or your San Francisco Examiner or whatever it is, and seeing full page ads for the New York Times, Netflix, HBO as those films are promoted. And so there's a moment where you just put up your hands and go, there's not a chance. But as was pointed out to me when early in the game, when the only judges were the documentary branch, it was pointed out to me that this is a very cranky group of people, and they are not likely to be bought by an ad. That was true in every case. Of the shortlisted films, the 10 shortlisted films, 3 were New York Times films, 3 were Netflix films. So that's 6 out of 10. Of those 6 films, only 1 survived, Heroin, with a knee at the end. It was a Netflix film, and that was the only of those films that survived the cut. All of the New York Times films went away. 2 out of the 3 Netflix films went away. Later, Traffic Stop was picked up by HBO, and so in the final analysis, we had 1 HBO film, 1 Netflix film, and 3 unaffiliated films.
Well, so we had conversations about what should be done after the nominations, and what did you do, and what did the competition do in your opinion?
Well, I think that Netflix has a large promotion department, and certainly enough and a lot of advertising dollars, and they were put against promoting their film. HBO began promoting their film. Voting began on the 20th of February. So voting for the Academy Award began on the 20th and ended on the 27th. HBO streamed their film starting on the 16th and introduced it with a lot of fanfare and advertising on the 19th, the day before voting began. So again, that's formidable. It occurred to me that the 2 or 3 things that I had going for me were a berserk title, Heaven is a Traffic Jam on the 405. It's interesting. The other day, somebody published an article in one of the trades on the 10 things that we did wrong and still got the Academy Award. One of them was you're supposed to have a short, punchy title, which we didn't have. But it occurred to me that there was a certain power in that it made you curious. And so one of the things that I did many months ago was I had 150 lawn signs made, which were sent, which I put in various parts of the city, near the 10, the 101, and the 405 freeway, without a .com, 20 by 18 lawn sign, the kind that the guys running for Congress might put up. And there was no call to action. It was just this curiosity. What do they mean by Heaven is a Traffic Jam on the 405? And we did that in 2 flights. One at the very beginning of this, and one toward the end. And it was purely to be curious. It was, and as you were driving by, if you were driving by at 40 miles an hour, you picked it up. I'm not sure anybody thought about it very much, but what happened now was the title started to become familiar. And I remember being at a doctor's appointment some months ago. He examined me, he said, "You're fine. What have you been doing?" I told him I was trying to get some attention for this film. He asked me the name of it. I told him, and he said, "Oh, yeah, I know that film." I said, "Really? What is it that you know?" And he said, "Well, it's people are talking about it." I said, "People are talking about it. People are talking about my short documentary. And what are they saying?" He said, "Well, the film's got some buzz." And I thought, only in LA can your doctor say your film has buzz. The fact is, he didn't know a thing about the film, but I then asked him what his commute was. And he told me the road that he took, and I told him where the sign was. And he just closed his eyes and he said, "Yes, I pass that every single day." That's exactly what I wanted. I just wanted familiarity. And the other thing that occurred to me was that while I don't, by nature, have a great deal of confidence in institutions, I do and did have a great deal of confidence in the film. And I felt that if people saw it, and if that it would, and so I made it available on the internet for free to anyone. Um, at last count, I think it's 190,000 downloads. And what happened over time was people did begin to embrace it. Whether they were Academy members or not, I didn't know. But I felt that if it were embraced, eventually this would get to the community I wanted to attract. And sure enough, on a given day, there was one celebrity and then another whose Twitter account indicated they had seen this film that they loved. And now that went out to a group that I couldn't get next to. I wouldn't be able to speak to, but it had the imprimatur of somebody that they knew that had loved the film, and maybe that caused them to see it. And again, I made it very, I made, there was no wall between anybody's desire to see the film and their ability to see the film. So I think all of that probably helped the film.
Can you guesstimate? Obviously, no one will know ever, but do you think you picked up what number of votes from Academy members from your sign placing?
No idea. No idea. I think it's, there's a great line, it's very, very old, by Lord Lever, one of the Lever brothers, who once said, "I know I'm wasting 50% of my advertising dollars. I just don't know which 50%." And I think it's that. I think that, you either believe that, that ideas and stunts like that are good, but it's impossible to quantify them. But, in the same way that you believe in your film, if, you've got to go the whole distance on something like that. So I vaguely think it had some impact, but there's no way for me to know.
So, like most of the other films that were nominated, you had 3 or 4 sizable six-figure grants that were backing you all the way with just boodles of cash. Is that right?
Yes.
I mean,
My film was made. My film was made for about $4. Aside from doing, yeah, go ahead.
no, I just wanted to say it's extraordinary that I happen to know, that you didn't have HBO or Showtime or Netflix or Amazon or the Ford Foundation or ITVS or anybody behind you, and I just want to hear about the process and about writing checks, and maybe if you say it was so little, it doesn't matter that much. But what was that like going forward? And I know it took a long time to make this film.
So this is a second career. I was an executive producer and primarily made TV commercials, did some television, and made my first film at the age of 63. That film was about my mother. And, I didn't have a plan. There was my big plan was to make a film about my mother that I would give to my children, and they would have a record of who this remarkable person was. She was alive at the time and healthy, and so I felt I needed to make it at a given point. I was an executive producer at Radical Media, who had purchased my company years before, and so I took some time off, made the film, spent far too long cutting it because, when you're the guy that's asking favors, you're at the end of the line, and that film had this magical entry into the world. It was shown at the Berlin Film Festival. It was probably in about 30 international festivals. It was at the Museum of Modern Art, picked up by HBO. And so that caused me to think, well, this is a much more fun thing to do than sitting in an office, and I quit. Heaven is a Traffic Jam is my second 40-minute film. And one of the things that I vowed when I retired from from actually drawing a salary, was that I was not going to wait. All of us that do anything, whether it's television or films or docs or commercials, you spend an inordinate amount of your time waiting for somebody to give you permission. And at the age of 63, I wasn't willing to wait. And so I felt that what I needed to do was figure out the cheapest way possible for me to make these films. And so aside from all the credits that you mentioned before, I was also the messenger, and and the gaffer. I mean, anything. I would venture to say that 90% of Heaven was done with me alone. I If I was interviewing, I would hire Ben Marius, who's a friend of both of ours, just so that he could sort of deal with the technology while I was with the subject that I was interviewing. And I shot 2 cameras, and he was responsible for that and sound quality. And I did a number of reenactments, most of which did not make the cut. The thing I say about Heaven is, if it took time or money, if it took time or money, it's probably not in the cut. And that's just that's just the way it worked. There were some things in it that were expensive, that I felt relatively expensive, that cost a few $1,000s. That seemed to make sense at the time, and then when putting together the final film, they didn't. There was a shot that I was terribly proud of, that I thought was beautifully directed. If I did say so myself, it just didn't belong in this film. And so at the end of the day, despite my happiness over what the shot was, and the expense in putting it together, it just it just took down the totality of the film, and so it had to go. But
That's
yeah,
one of
I
the,
mean,
I'm going to say that's one of
I
the,
just did. Go ahead.
I was that's one of the faults of young and upcoming filmmakers like yourself, that find it difficult to take out their favorite shots, and they you say
No,
it's
it's
our
true.
babies, right?
The editor knew immediately, and I kept on saying, well, let's try it again. And at the end of the day, it just didn't fit. It might fit into one of your films, but it didn't fit into this film. And so it had to go. And but like I said, 90% of it was me, camera, sound equipment. That's it.
What was it like working with Mindy, who was the star and featured in your film? Give me a short description,
Delightful.
then we'll run a clip afterwards. So,
Mindy is a woman who is an extraordinary artist, suffers from a number of mental disorders, and is one of the funniest, smartest people I've ever met. And so one of the great joys was just hanging out with her. And we continue to do that. My wife or I speak to her every day. And that's not work. That's pure pleasure. So that was just this gift that I wouldn't have expected, but remains this wonderful thing that sort of dropped into my lap.
so here is just a short. Here's a minute or so, a little bit of background towards the beginning of the film. Let's take a look.
When I was 16, everything for me started getting worse. My father and I were fighting all the time. It seemed to me that Whenever he saw me, he would start to yell. I just infuriated him.
He saw her being helpless, not being able to care for herself. And I think he thought that was deliberate, was something that she could help, that she could do something about.
My mother didn't step in between us. Possible she was afraid of him. Possible she did not have those natural mother feeling of protecting your children. And at one point it just became so bad between us. My mother came to me and said, I think you should leave. So I did.
What was it like showing the film to Mindy the first time, and at what stage of the film did you show it to her?
So I was always aware that I was dealing in dangerous territory here. I was dealing with a family, a mother who had a great deal of shame about her behavior, a father who was abusive, and yet his wife was vested in protecting his memory. Not to mention, Mindy herself, who had been at the effect of this family and who had, endured horrible things having to do with her disorder. She had electroshock therapy. She had a 10-year period without an ability to speak, and so I knew I was treading lightly. I had to tread lightly over this stuff, and I certainly didn't want to make things worse for anybody. And so I determined that I needed a governor. I needed somebody to tell me that I had taken a shortcut, and I had put together footage that if I had put together footage in such a way that it was not entirely true, I needed to know that. And I decided that Mindy was that person, and that I would show her every cut. And the first time I showed it to her, the film went from, a first cut of 84 minutes where I was pretty clear that I was lost, and to 62 minutes where it started to take shape, to 40 minutes, which was its where it should have lived. After every cut, I showed it to Mindy and gave her a pad and pen and said, write down everything that seems wrong to you. See anything that seems that I've cut a corner. And the first time that we did this, she sat there quietly and at one point started to scribble something on the pad, which I couldn't find. And at the end of it, I looked at the pad, and what it said was, "Too much Mindy." So we did that over and over again. Every time I had a cut, I invited her over to take a look at it.
So Mindy took all these notes. Was there any point in time where did you take all of her suggestions or none of her suggestions, or what was the process there?
There was nothing that she felt that was objectionable. So when she wrote "Too Much Mindy" was actually just a joke. But I think it does deal with the issue of what it's like for anybody, anybody who's not used to being on camera to suddenly be looking at their story, to be looking at themselves for 40 minutes. That must be something. It certainly, it was upsetting to my mother the first time she saw a film. I'm sure it was upsetting to Mindy. There was nothing in the film that she felt was unfair. So we never did actually have to do that. I found in looking at cuts that there was one piece of it that that I would always twitch every time there was a particular line about that Mindy's mother used to describe her husband, where she described him as being powerful. And that was part of the the let's make let's retain pleasant memories of the deceased. He wasn't powerful, and every time he wasn't powerful, he was an abuser. And so every time that line came up in the edit, I just could feel that twitch, and in fact went back for another interview just to deal with that issue. And to Mindy's mom, to Barbara's credit, she allowed me to go there, and she was able to speak about his intolerance toward her, toward the rest of the family.
So your film is very intimate and it reveals quite a bit. Let's take a look at another inside short clip from the film.
But it's really not nearly as bad as times as I've had before. And where I've ended up in the hospital and suicidal times ago. I was 7 old, and that's when I completely fell apart and had no speech at all, not any ability to write or think words. I just started to lose control of my body. I had had a nervous breakdown, and I was hospitalized in a mental hospital. The doctor there said, "Don't worry, we will find the rock in your head." So I was terrified because I thought that there was some gigantic tumor going on in my brain.
It's pretty heavy stuff, actually. I mean, but we have the best to come yet at the end.
The thing, I looked at that and it occurred to me that we think in terms of interview as being the interview. In Mindy's case, there were 6 interviews. And just, the dynamic of our relationship was such where, so much of her story had been hidden, so much of it, there was so much shame attached to so much of it that, it just had to happen over time, and it couldn't all happen at one time. I probably prepared 2 or 3 hours for every interview, and I just found that we could go for about 3 or 4 hours, and that was it. And like I said, we had the benefit of enjoying each other, and so we would hang out when I didn't have a camera in my hand, and over time, there were layer upon layer upon layer that just got pulled back, and so those interviews became more intimate as I think we trusted each other more. So that's probably 6 interviews of. I probably have 20 hours of interview for a 40-minute film, and it was just necessary to do it that way in order to get as close to her as and to understand that the various levels of that story.
What we really haven't talked about yet is one of the more extraordinary parts of the film and her story is her art. And, we've seen some of the paintings and the clips here if you haven't seen the film. But I think the most dramatic example of her art is the paper mache material that she does. Let's run this other short clip here and take a brief look at a little bit of what she's doing.
And I was trying to think, who could I spend that much time focusing on and really want to be with their face? And it was obviously my doctor, Shoshana. It was a really difficult project because it was very hard for me to see her really, because my feelings are so big. Before Shoshana, I was a complete mess. I was terrified of everyone. I hated myself. I blamed everyone for being rotten to me. No matter what craziness was happening around me or in me, there was this one person always on my side, Shoshana.
So I know as of the day or the week of the Academy Awards, you didn't have any distribution for the film, and I'm wondering, since you've won the award, has that changed?
It hasn't. It hasn't. I find it surprising as well. I think that I think that your film is, as good as your film may be, it has to fit into the world that that you're now living in, and so people are not buying your film as much as they're buying an audience, and so just in watching what has been picked up, they tend to be edgier. They tend to be very hard edge. They tend to be about today's headline. This is not an easy film to describe in one sentence. It's a very nuanced portrait of somebody who suffers from mental illness. And while what I have found in traveling around the country with it is that mental illness is in everyone's family, it is not a subject that anybody really wants to speak about. So the film, I still have hopes that it will be picked up, and I am surprised that I haven't received a phone call yet. But it doesn't fit crisply into what is wanted right now. This is a period where true crime documentary has done really well. And issues of addiction and issues of brutality. So this is none of those.
So since this is only your second film, I guess you're just gearing up and getting ready to do the next one. And now that you have this little boost behind you, what are you going to be doing?
It's going to be similar. I mean, it's going to be similar in approach, in that I'm not going to be looking for funding. I'm not going to be looking for anybody's opinion. I'm going to fall in love with somebody, and I'm going to just dive as deeply into their lives as I possibly can. There's a subject that I've been interested in. I have a meeting on that next week. To see whether somebody can help me sort of flush out that subject. There's a kid that I met at a party who suffers from something and is just so open-hearted and so generous in a 15-minute conversation we had, that I want to know more about him. So I think that it'll probably be similar. I think that if I go the route of a portrait, which I've done twice before, I think it's just a matter of finding somebody who I'm just so curious about, somebody who so doesn't live my life, and I just want to know more and more about theirs. And the motivator and the propulsion of the film really becomes my need to know more. Or it'll be this other thing that I've been curious about for many years. So but yeah, I'm on the make, man. I'm looking for something.
Well, thank you, Frank Stiefel, Oscar Award winning documentary filmmaker. It's been a pleasure interviewing you, being your friend, and I hope we obviously continue that. Hope maybe even take a bike ride sometime in the future. Thank you so
It'll
much.
have to be short. It'll have to be going downhill only.
That's our favorite part, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. All right.
Thanks
Thank you, Chuck.
again. Thank you. Take care.
Okay. Goodbye.